About 12 years ago, I was living in my parents' house trying to write a book. I was a different person back then, and my brain was in what you could call a different state. Even though I was trying to concentrate on writing, I couldn't help but think about other things. And I thought. A lot. During the day, I would just walk around the house and think. In the shower, I could easily get lost in thought for hours. And at night, I would lay awake in bed, simply thinking about these ideas. I figured one day maybe I could do something with them, so I wrote them all down. Eventually, there were enough ideas that I started putting them all onto an actual list. But ultimately, my focus was on my book. At the time, that was more important to me than anything else. As I got older, I started having fewer ideas, but I kept that list. Well, as of 3 months ago, I finally published the book I've been working on for the last 15 years. From there, I immediately started working on the audiobook version, which I then published about 90 days later to YouTube. But now that whole project is done. The book is dead, or at least my focus on it is. Now I thought maybe I would make some sales with my book. Over the years, I've thought a lot about my list and the different items on it. Some of them are things that require funding to start, and I thought if my book sold a decent enough number of copies, I could use that money to start working on some of these ideas, checking them off the list, so to speak. Ideally, that was the plan, to use any money I made from my book as a way of bootstrapping the various projects and ideas I had on my list, at least the big projects. Because I really do care about these things, and I think a lot of what's on my list could be useful to other people. But of course, my book has made almost no sales. I don't think even one person has read or listened to the whole thing. There are currently a few views on the audiobook version on YouTube. But the thing about YouTube is, they show you the analytics. They show you how much time people have spent watching your video. And they also show you where people stopped watching. And from the analytics, I can see that of those 15 views, the average watch time is 30 minutes, and the longest someone watched was the halfway point, which means no one actually finished the book, or even got through the main argument I was making. It's the same with the website where the text version is posted. If you didn't know, my entire book is free, without advertisements, on primaryfunctionofthebrain.com. But, like YouTube, my website also gives you analytics. Now I can't see exactly what people are reading on my site, but when there are 20 viewers and the average time spent on site is 4 seconds, well, I think you can do the math. The truth is, I kind of suspected all this. I suspected that my book wouldn't see much success, just because of what it is. However, what this means is, I can't actually do what I had planned on doing. I can't work on my list the way I wanted to. So the only other thing I can do is talk about the ideas on my list. That's what this podcast will ultimately be. Okay, so what do these ideas involve? What are the items on my list actually about? Well, a lot of this stuff is just completely random in nature. There are a lot of thoughts I've had over the years that I just decided to sit down and expand on because I thought it was interesting, because I had the time to. However, a lot of it is psychology related. If you read my book's introduction, you know that psychology was my main area of interest for a long time. But not all of the ideas on my list actually have to do with psychology. Some of the items are just topics I want to speak on. Some of the things are actually inventions that I've had the idea for and that I've drawn up concepts for. Who knows if these inventions would be viable in the real world, but that's why I wanted to test them out. Another thing to mention is that I haven't actually finalized the list itself. There are hundreds of items on it, but they aren't organized, so I still need to go through each of them and decide what I want to keep. Since a lot of it is old, I'm probably going to end up throwing out or combining many of the items. It might end up being the case that 90% of it is unusable, which means this podcast might only have a few big episodes. Or I could end up keeping a lot of it, and this podcast might go on for years. I'm not sure yet. But what I do know is that I don't have an infinite number of ideas. At some point, my list will run out, which means this podcast will have a definite end. Now, technically, my book's hypothesis was the first item on the list. That was the very first thing that I wrote down, and to respect that, the episode numbers of this podcast will go from 0 to 2. Number 1 will be missing, because my book was the first item. Also, some of my ideas will definitely be controversial. But does it really matter? Who is there to impress, anyway? We all die. And getting these ideas into the world is ultimately more important to me than being agreeable. Besides, I promised myself that I would do something with this list before it all comes to a close, and I'm going to keep that promise.